Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Gaza lecture series. This lecture series is co-sponsored by 6 different units here at Georgetown University, and it was put together in response to one of the great moral and political questions of this era, the US-backed genocide in Gaza. Next week, we have the honor of hosting the distinguished scholar of fascism, Jason Stanley, next Monday to speak about the legacy of genocide as part of our lecture series. But today, we turn our attention to one of the key events that is part of this story and that you're all familiar with, Donald Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza. Will this proposed plan bring an end to the conflict in Gaza? To what extent does President Trump deserve credit for obtaining a ceasefire and proposing a solution to the Gaza crisis? Or is this just a temporary passing moment that will produce more violence and human suffering in the broken, beleaguered, and destroyed Gaza Strip? To help us answer these questions, it's a huge honor to be hosting today Diana Buttu. Diana Buttu is a lawyer who specializes in international law, international human rights, and humanitarian law. She teaches international human rights law, international law, and negotiations. She was involved in the Israel-Palestinian negotiations from 2000 to 2005 in the context of the Oslo Accords, and worked as an advisor to the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Palestinian president. She's a frequent commentator on the Israel-Palestine conflict. She's written for all of the mainstream publications that you're familiar with. Most recently, a very long and detailed essay that was both political and personal that appeared in The Guardian, and I will be asking her to elaborate on that piece shortly. Ms. Buttu was a former fellow at Stanford, at Harvard, and currently she's a professor of practice in residence at our sister campus, Georgetown University in Qatar. The format today is we're going to have a conversation, and then we're going to turn it over to you for questions and answers. Deanna, thank you very much for being here. I know it's a difficult time. We appreciate your presence to help us understand this topic. So let me begin with a broad question and take your time to answer it. Quoting from your piece that you published recently in The Guardian, you write, "While an end to the bombing, the freedom of captives on both sides, and allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza would bring some relief in an otherwise unbearably bleak landscape, it would be a mistake to view the plan, Trump's plan, as a historic breakthrough for Palestine." Please elaborate.
First, I want to thank you, Nathan, for inviting me. It's wonderful to be back here. I haven't been to DC in a while, so it's really nice to be here. It's wonderful to be on campus here. I also want to thank all of you for coming to today's event. It's really nice to see so many friendly faces and some friends. It's nice to see you all here today, so thank you. You know, to answer the question, I wrote this piece before the big announcement. And the reason I wrote this and wrote that particular line was because I knew exactly what was going to happen. And I want to step back and talk about not only what's gone on in Gaza, but what has happened with this so-called plan. And, you know, it's important to keep in mind that over the course of the past 2 years, we have seen, we're witnessing genocide, live streamed. We've witnessed the destruction of Gaza, as the Israelis said that they were going to do. We know that according to just the basic numbers that we know, that Israel has killed 70,000 Palestinians. And these are the most conservative numbers that we know. There are still another 10,000 Palestinians who are underneath the rubble that we know of. The estimates are much higher, but these are just the numbers, the basic conservative numbers that we know. Israel has violated across all of the red lines, bombed hospitals, schools, universities, cultural centers, killed journalists, 280 of them, paramedics, doctors, nurses, rescue workers. It's flattened practically the largest Palestinian city, Gaza City. Flattened 90% of the homes that are in Gaza. Made unusable 98% of Gaza's agricultural land. And it's for this reason that we've seen every major human rights organization step up and say that this is genocide. Major human rights organizations, genocide scholars, the Association of Genocide Scholars label it as such. We've even had 2 Israeli human rights organizations label it genocide. Late, by the way. Late, but they've labeled it as genocide. And so when something is labeled genocide, the whole point of labeling it genocide is, and by the way, sorry, the International Court of Justice said that there is enough to say that there is a plausible case of genocide. When it comes to genocide, you don't wait for after the fact to have it be declared genocide, because then it doesn't make sense to have a genocide convention. The whole point of it is to stop the genocide. And the whole idea behind having a genocide convention is that not only is it to stop it, but when there is a crime that is as high as genocide, all states around the world, not just those who've signed on to the Genocide Convention, are under an obligation to stop it. And so here comes Trump along with this great plan. And what he does is he doesn't stop genocide. And instead of the world taking action to stop this genocide, as they should have done, by imposing an arms embargo, by imposing sanctions on Israel, by kicking Israel out of the United Nations, by kicking Israel out of all of these associations around the world. Instead of doing that, they've now applauded Trump for this plan that does nothing other than stop the bombs for a temporary period of time. And that's why I wrote that, yes, we are happy that the bombs stopped temporarily, but please don't anybody think that this is going to put an end to it. Instead, what he did was he papered over it. He whitewashed it, and he flew to Sharm el-Sheikh and got rounds of applause. And so much so that one journalist even had the audacity to say, so now that we have started a peace process. So it just shows you that even in the language that people are thinking about this, that we've now gone from genocide to a peace process. And instead, what we see in Gaza today is that Israel has not let in the aid as they were supposed to. They have not let in the construction equipment as they were supposed to. They're still killing Palestinians on a daily basis. And again, sites have turned to other matters, and all of this is no longer being covered. And yet Trump is getting this credit for peace.
Okay, let me just say for the record, I agree with your assessment. I think actually this plan does not stand up to any critical moral scrutiny. It's actually horrific. But let me play devil's advocate.
Please, by all means.
I have the text of the plan in my hand here. What about those positive aspects of the plan? Article 2. Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered more than enough. Article 6. Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty. Article 7. Upon acceptance of this agreement, full aid will immediately be sent to Gaza. Article 9, Gaza will be governed by a Palestinian team of technocrats. Article 12, no one will be forced to leave Gaza, and those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. We will encourage people to stay and offer them opportunity to rebuild Gaza. Article 16, Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. And then finally at the end, there is a quotation that talks about, and I'm quoting from Article 19, a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Aren't those things that we're building on?
No.
Okay, tell us why.
All right, let me begin. So first is that we haven't seen any of that aid in, as I mentioned. Israel has not only not allowed the required number of trucks in, but then they put conditions on what is allowed in and what isn't allowed. The height, the quantity, the height of the trucks, the width of the trucks, what is allowed in, what isn't allowed in. There's still certain things that are completely off limits, certain medicines that are completely off limits, but I don't want to get into the technicalities of that. Why is it, let's go bigger. Why is it that a country that has committed genocide over the course of the past 2 years still has any say in what Palestinian lives are about? That is the question. Why is it that a country that has committed genocide over the course of the past 2 years imposes any conditions on Palestinians and what it is, what weapons they have and what weapons they don't have? Why is it that we're not looking at the issue of disarming Israel that has committed genocide over the course of the past 2 years, rather than the other way around, and recognizing that Israel poses an existential threat to Palestinian lives, but instead it's always turning it around, that somehow Palestinians pose an existential threat to Israel, when it's exactly the opposite, that Israel poses an existential threat to Palestinian lives. And when we go down the path of recognizing that, then we will stop going down these little things of saying, oh yes, they can have a truck here and a truck there, even though Israel gets to inspect the truck. Israel gets to do this, Israel gets to do that. And if you behave well, if you're good, then yes, we will recognize that you have an aspiration. Right? That's what they're doing, that's what they're saying.
Okay, if it's as bad as you say, then how do you respond to the fact that this is not a U.S.-Israeli imposed sort of plan of subjugation on the Palestinians? Because the Arab and Muslim world has supported the plan, the leading states. Let's leave the Arab dictators aside for a moment. Some of the biggest backers of the Palestinians in the international system, Qatar, Turkey, Pakistan, even Indonesia. And then just to add one layer, the Palestine Authority has endorsed the plan. Not only did they endorse the plan, they endorsed Tony Blair as the new viceroy of Gaza.
Wonderful. Did Gazans endorse it? Did the people of Gaza? Did anybody ask the people of Gaza? If Trump went around and had meeting after meeting with all of these leaders, but he didn't meet the Palestinians. Isn't that remarkable to you, America? Isn't that stunning? Doesn't that sound like colonialism all over again? Not only that, whether you like him or don't like him, and I have my own expressions when it comes to Hamas, my own opinions. He didn't even give the guy a visa to come here. He met with everybody, but he didn't give the guy a visa to come here. So all to say is that, yes, it's wonderful that all these people agreed to it. Yes, you can agree to sell somebody else's house. It doesn't affect you. But the fact that he didn't even talk to Palestinians. But even more than that, again, why is it that we are negotiating an end to genocide? This is the problem that is driving me crazy, is that this is the only place in the world, the only time in history that people have to negotiate an end to genocide, when it should be that the world is stopping genocide. This is the only time in history that people have to negotiate an end to famine with the very entity that is starving them. That's the problem with all of this. So that's wonderful that all these countries around the world, Indonesia, whatever, it's wonderful that they agreed to it.
Including the Palestinian leadership.
The Palestinian leadership at the end, they said we welcome it. Right? They didn't.
Including Tony Blair.
I don't care. Tony Blair, the butcher of Baghdad. That's a different matter altogether. But all to say is that here the whole construct of it is wrong. It's the construct of it that is wrong.
No, I agree. I mean, when I first commented on it, the first thing that struck me when I read the plan, or I thought about the plan, is this is a plan that's been written without any Palestinian input. Not even the pro-Western leaders in Ramallah were consulted. So that sort of strikes you as sort of a glaring omission.
It's an Israeli plan, which they branded with into a Trump plan, and you can tell that it's an Israeli plan by, for those of you who have read it, or maybe even those who haven't read it, there, on almost every issue, there are guarantees that are given to the Israeli side. There's no guarantees given to the Palestinian side.
Yeah.
It's all guarantees that are given to the Israeli side. It's very clear.
Does Trump deserve any credit for vociferously opposing, and just recently, in fact, the annexation of the West Bank? They're saying that we're not going to endorse that.
The West, that's a red herring. The West Bank has already been annexed. It's really red herring. What do I mean by that? If you live in an Israeli settlement, there is no difference between the laws that are imposed in the Israeli settlement versus the laws that are active in Tel Aviv. So it's not like there's a separate commercial code in the Israeli settlement area versus Tel Aviv. It's the same laws. And so all of that, it's already been annexed. It's already been annexed. The only thing that has not happened is that they haven't grabbed our faces and shoved it in the mud and said, look, this is the formal annexation now. But de facto, it's already been annexed. And so all of this is a red herring. And so don't be, people shouldn't be confused by this.
So why are Arab states so happy that, look, by signing on to, let's say, the Abraham Accords, we prevented annexation?
But they didn't because they don't understand what the context is. It's their way of appeasing themselves and saying that they did something for Palestinians, but they didn't.
Okay, how important is the recent move that we heard over the summer, this initiative by France and Saudi Arabia to generate global recognition for the state of Palestine? How significant is that? I mean, Canada, for example, recognized that all these new countries have signed on. Is that something we should celebrate?
So, I'm going to give the good and the bad on this. One of the reasons that they did this was because Canada and all these other countries were loath to do anything regarding genocide. I can speak on Canada, but this is where I was born. There was a lot of pressure on Canada to impose an arms embargo. Canada does send a lot of weaponry, by the way, to Israel. And instead of imposing an arms embargo, as they should, because as I said, they are signatory to the Genocide Convention, and it doesn't matter if they're signatory, we see that there is genocide, and so they should stop the flow of weapons. Instead of doing that, they gave us a cookie, and they said, here, we recognize you as a state, okay? Here's your cookie. All right. Now, at the same time, there are things that Canada and all these other countries can do now that they've given us the cookie, which is there are settlements that are in the West Bank. And they now have to do something in relation to those settlements. Those settlements exist. Those are war crimes. They could have done it before, but now that they have recognized Palestine as a state, this is a violation of Palestine's sovereignty. And so they have to do something about it. Do I think they will? No. No. That's what I wrote about in the essay in The Guardian. Do I think they will? No. Can they? Absolutely they can. They could have done it before, but I suspect that they won't. I suspect that all of this is going to be wrapped up in the same idea of, yes, we recognize your sovereignty, but we believe that you're still going to have to achieve statehood through negotiations.
Through negotiations. Let me draw upon your expertise as an international lawyer and international legal expert. So there's talk now that this Trump peace plan is going to be proposed as a UN Security Council resolution.
Yes.
That would then allow, for example, other countries like Indonesia, Turkey maybe, and Egypt and Jordan to send troops under the auspices of the UN Security Council resolution. From an international law perspective, the International Court of Justice has ruled that Gaza and West Bank are occupied territory. Israel has no right to be there. How can a UN resolution endorse a plan that basically, was built on the back of the genocide, but also allows for Israel, even if it withdraws to that last phase, 15% occupation of a piece of territory that under international law is considered to be occupied. There's a deep tension there between a UN resolution that might actually pass based on the votes, and then the International Court of Justice ruling that came out last July, and many previous resolutions that considers Gaza to be occupied territory. How does this work out?
Okay, so I'll explain what the ruling was, and then I'll.
Please.
Okay, so last July of 2024, there was an advisory opinion that came out. Now, advisory opinion is law. People say, oh, it's an advisory opinion, doesn't mean anything. No, it's law. They wouldn't bother themselves issuing an advisory opinion unless it was law. It's a advisory opinion comes from when the UN General Assembly requests the International Court of Justice to give a ruling about a legal issue. And at the time, the question was, what are the legal consequences of Israel's long-term occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip? And the court came out with a ruling saying that Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip is illegal, not only because of the way in which it's been carried out, everything from the denial of water to the building of settlements to the denial of self-determination and so on, but also because of the length of the occupation. Occupation is supposed to be temporary in nature, it's not supposed to be a long term, and in the case of Israel, it's now been 58 years and they've made it clear that when you build settlements, it becomes clear that you're staying there forever. These are not little tents, these are full-fledged cities. And so when the court ruled that this occupation is illegal, they then said that all of the settlements should go, and in September of 2024, a UN General Assembly resolution was passed saying that Israel has 1 year in which to abide by this ruling. And of course it did not. And the court also said that states are under an obligation to make sure that Israel abides by this ruling as well. And of course, they did not. So now we're going to have this, you said it might, I'm pretty confident that they will, that the US will be pushing for a UN Security Council resolution. I'm pretty certain that that resolution will pass because of the composition of the Security Council. And what impact will it have? You're right, there's going to be a contradiction because you have a ruling that says that Israel's occupation is illegal, and then you're going to have
a resolution that sanctifies that.
That sanctifies it. And there you go. There you're going to see the exact tension between the UN Security Council and between the International Court of Justice.
Okay, this brings us to the bigger issue that I wanted to ask you about. Again, take as much time as you need. But the core problem facing the Palestinians today, as you write about in your essay, and as everyone knows, is a deep imbalance in power, a deeply asymmetrical relationship between the Palestinians and their adversaries. The big question, I think, in terms of a national liberation struggle is how do you fix this imbalance of power when you have international law on your side, you have most of global public opinion on your side, you don't have most of the states in the world, the Western world, even in the Arab and Islamic world on your side, but you have a lot of moral power and force. I mean, in the United States today, the recent polling shows 50% of Americans agree that Israel is guilty of the crime of genocide. 40% of American Jews believe it's genocide. University campuses are bastions of sympathy and solidarity for Palestinian suffering. But when you look at the plight of the Palestinians today, you see this imbalance in power, and the question becomes, as a national liberation movement, how do you fix it? What do you need to do? What are the gaps that you see? Your essay talks eloquently about the need for the international community to do the right thing, but I want to ask you that question from a different perspective, from the perspective of a national liberation movement. You've been involved in the negotiation process, you worked for the Palestinian president, you worked for the Palestinian Liberation Organization. What's clear to me is that there's no effective Palestinian leadership that's credible, that's representative, that's incorruptible, that has a vision or even a strategy. I just mentioned a moment ago, you have this Trump peace plan where the leading Palestinian representative endorses it, including the role of Tony Blair. So, there's no Palestinian leadership that I can see. So how do Palestinians get out of this dark moment in their history? What thoughts do you have? What strategy? What's the way forward?
You know, Nanda, I don't even know where to begin to give that question.
Give it your best shot.
The reason I don't know where to begin is
It's
because it's deep, it's painful,
It's personal.
it's personal, and all those things. First, where do I begin? We don't have National Liberation Movement anymore. The National Liberation Movement was killed when that National Liberation Movement signed Oslo. And the moment that they signed Oslo, the vision was no longer about national liberation. It became about, the vision became solely about creating a state. And the state being only about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And then not only was it just a vision of developing a state on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, but it became a vision of how do we create this state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and forget about 1948, forget about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, forget about Palestinian refugees. But it then became, how do we appease all of these powers to get this state? And no matter how much they appeased these world powers, and no matter how much they tried to appease a psychopathic Israel, because it is psychopathic, it was always the case that the demands were higher and higher and higher and higher, and they lost complete vision of the idea of national liberation. And so fast forward to today, where you have a Palestinian Authority that is no longer even speaking about national liberation. They're talking about their own survival. And in the midst of this idea of their own survival, they accept things like the butcher of Baghdad to be the viceroy of Gaza, when nobody asked him to be there. Nobody. And so, so it's deeply painful, because I saw this, for me, as somebody who was involved in this, it's these things that keep me up at night, right? Because I saw it, and I was up close, and it pains me, because I was part of it. I didn't sign Oslo, but I was part of it. And so you see this, and you just see how all of this has deteriorated and deteriorated and deteriorated. How do we get out of it? I wish I had the answer, Nanda. Because part of it is that it's not just that we are lacking leadership, it's that we've been played by so many people around the world. Leaders came also from the Arab states and played us. And so we're in a really, we're not in a great position right now.
Well, let me propose an idea and get your reaction.
Yeah.
I think what's clearly needed is what's needed for the Palestinians is a Palestinian leadership.
Oh yeah, that we know.
And so the question then becomes, do you seek to revise and resuscitate and expand the PLO, or do you create something new that is truly inclusive, representative, and incorruptible, and of course critically, is not just representing the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, but all Palestinians, because they're part of the story as well. So that strikes me as sort of the most important point to focus on, because I don't know of any national liberation organization that was successful in getting anything that didn't have an effective leadership.
Absolutely.
So that would seem to me to be the priority now, especially against the backdrop of this genocide. I mean, if this genocide doesn't produce this type of soul searching and cry for a new leadership that can lead the Palestinians out of this dark moment, I don't know what will. And so, what do you think of that?
So, Najat, look, there's two things to that. One is that we've been having this debate now for like 25 years, right? Do we revive the PLO? Do we not revive the PLO? Do we focus on internal? Do we focus on external? Do we create something new, etc.? That's been a debate that's been going on for quite some time. But, and then by the way, just so time will take its toll. Mazen will be 90 in a month's time.
Mhm.
I'm not so sure how much longer he's going to do that.
There'll be another Abu Mazen who will take his place.
Maybe, yes, maybe. I'm not so sure that people are going to deal with another Abu Mazen. But there's something also that's really important. There is a leadership in Palestine. And that leadership is the people. And there is a leadership that is natural, that is homegrown, and that sometimes we tend to discount. If you look at what has happened, whether it's the first intifada, the second intifada, the genocide, what's led people is people who are inside the country. It hasn't come from the outside, it's come from inside. And people around the world have followed. Has it translated into that global leadership of people who are on an international stage? No, and we do need that. I'm fully aware of that. But there is a leadership, and I don't think we should always discount the strength, the sheer strength of Palestinians who have stubbornly refused to give in to a nuclear power, despite it all. And by the way, this includes Palestinians inside, who I think sometimes get discounted. These are Palestinians who are 20% of the population.
Living inside Israel.
Living inside, yes, who have refused to give in, who've refused to submit, who are still fighting, they're still speaking Arabic, they're still holding on to their Palestinian identity. I'm one of them. We still call our cities and towns and villages by their original names. We still insist on raising our kids with a strong Palestinian identity, despite everything. It's important that people understand that there is an internal leadership that continues to thrive despite every single attempt to crush us.
Well, one last question, and we'll open it up to the audience. You live in Haifa now, right?
Yes.
How difficult is it to live as a Palestinian in Haifa in the context of this genocidal moment?
Oh, where do I begin that? I don't even know where to begin. This is another one.
Tell us some stories then of interactions that you have. I'm not surprised that given the safety concerns, that you're still living there, given what I've heard and read. So I don't know. Tell us about the security and safety concerns that you have for your family.
Okay, maybe I'll start with first I'll start with friends and then I'll move on to family because they've had it much worse. So, one of my friends is a singer, and she, on October the 7th, posted on Facebook in Arabic, La ghalib illallah, there is no victor but God. And wow, how crazy. And because of that, she started to get death threats. And she reported the death threats to the police. Instead of the police going after the people who were sending her death threats, they arrested her. And she was thrown in prison for a few days, eventually released. Fine. After she was released, her neighbors staged protests in front of her house for 153 days. The mayor of her town he ran a whole election campaign on kicking her out of the town. They cut off her water, her electricity. They brought garbage and put it in front of her. These are her neighbors, by the way, the people that used to come over to her house. Put garbage in front of her house, and the garbage collectors refused to pick it up for days and days and days, weeks actually on end. They changed the name of her street from the name of some bird to IDF Street, so that she would always have to write IDF Street on her mail. And this was like...
How representative is that story?
Oh, totally, all the time. This was a commonplace. There was a teacher who was thrown in jail because she was seen dancing. She did a TikTok on October the 7th, 2024. And so they thought that she was dancing to celebrate October the 7th, 2023. It's just the crazy, crazy, crazy things. Personally, what happened to me was tons of death threats, doxed, calls in the middle of the night. They published not just my home address, the address of my son's school, my cell phone, my home phone, you name it. So I had a file that I called love letters. I still have it. And this is what your life is about. But then you see everything like all around. You live in a society where you're hearing the president say that there are no innocents in Gaza. You hear people say that every house should be flattened. You live in a place where you hear your neighbor saying that it's okay to kill kids. So, this is just the price, is what one of my so-called left-wing neighbors would say to me. You turn on the television, and in the same newscast, you hear one person saying that there's no starvation in Gaza, and then 5 minutes later, you hear somebody saying, yes, we need to starve each and every person in Gaza. You see people putting bouncy castles in front of the crossing point, the sole crossing point to bring food into Gaza so that no food gets into Gaza, so that it stops the trucks. A bouncy castle. So that their kids are bouncing on these bouncy castles to prevent kids in Gaza from getting food. Right? It's a messed up place. It's totally messed up. And so you're living with the combination of a society that is very supportive of genocide, and the opinion polls are showing that not only are they supporting of genocide, but of ethnic cleansing, not only of Gaza, but of people who hold Israeli citizenship. And you see it playing itself out, and then you turn on the news, and it's there, you hear it, and you're physically unsafe. People tell me that they don't want to speak Arabic because they feel physically unsafe. And so you live in this world where you know that they want to get rid of you. Look, now that my late father, he was 9 during the Nakba. And he, to survive the Nakba, he lived with people who had either perpetrated the Nakba, which is the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, or those who were apologists for it, or were Nakba deniers. Now me and my son, who was 9 in 2023, 11 now, he lives with people who either committed the genocide, or apologists for the genocide, or genocide deniers. It's the exact same.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's take some questions. We have a free speech policy that we have to read out before we take the first question. Jonathan?
Thank you all for coming to this session. Georgetown University is committed to standards promoting speech and expression that foster the maximum exchange of ideas and opinions. While it is recognized that audience members may not share the same views as the speakers, it is expected that everyone in attendance at this event will respect the right of the speaker and the organizing department to share their perspectives and ideas and not cause a disruption. There will now be a question and answer session, during which you may ask questions. Please be sure to phrase your comments in the form of the question, and in the interest of time, we ask that each person be concise and ask only one question.
Right here in the front. First question.
Hi. So, regarding the plan, we know that Trump is grossly narcissistic, and we know that he loves being showered with praise. And surprisingly, this is how foreign policy is being constructed in the United States these days, apparently. So my question is, aside from appeasing Trump, realistically, what do Arab leaders get out of approving or welcoming the plan?
I think that what they were looking for was they wanted to stop the bombs and to get aid in. That was it. In fact, I mean, this is what every leader said. And in particular, Qatar. This is what they repeated over and over again. We want to stop the bombs, stop the killing, and get aid in. And that's it. I think that that was the simple equation. I don't think that they realize just how much the Israelis control Palestinian lives. And a plan like this, an agreement like this, anything like this, like, it needs to have a lot of oversight. And I don't think anybody really recognized just that level of oversight that is needed, right? Like, I don't know what the word is, Arabic nafas tawil, right? And not just oversight, but just the level of detail, so that the Israelis don't get away with it. And so far, that oversight, that nafas tawil, is not there. Which is why, for example, when the Israelis were releasing the 1,700 prisoners, hostages, right? These were 1,700 hostages. These were people who were abducted from Gaza in the aftermath of they were November onward of 2023. These included a 71-year-old woman who was abducted from her hospital bed, a boy who's autistic, who can't communicate. They included a double amputee. All of these people were mistreated, starved, some tortured, and they left behind over 1,000. Then of the 250 prisoners that they were supposed to be releasing, the ones with the so-called life sentences, the Israelis changed the definition of what a life sentence was. Right, so they only released 189. Then they released people who didn't have life sentences, who had what they called long-term. Some of them only had months left on their sentence. And then they released people who were on remand, meaning that they had never been sentenced, period. Right? So this is the role of the mediators. This is the nafas tawil. This is the oversight that is needed. But nobody followed that, right? Like, this is where, and so yes, they believe in the narcissists, and they need to, you're such a good boy, you're a nice leader. But at the same time, it requires a level of oversight that none of them, I think, were willing to invest.
Yeah, at the back. Yeah.
We have one here.
Okay, we'll go to you next.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for your talk.
Where's this? Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for your talk. A few weeks ago, Professor Rashid was here. He spoke about the role of the need to revitalize the leadership and the role that each different subgroup of Palestinians have. And so he gave the Palestinians in '48 the role of sort of like the forerunners because of their experiences of living with Israelis. And so I wanted to ask you about what role do you see the diaspora playing, specifically in North America? What role do you see Palestinians in '48 playing, and into kind of revitalizing them? Because I think we don't talk about the way that those in the diaspora have an advantage point. Those in the '48 have an advantage point over those in the West Bank who have been conditioned and habituated to sort of accepting and kind of collaborating with the Israeli regime. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that you're going to, please forgive me for this, okay, because this is going to sound like I'm elevating 48 because I am from 48. I was born in Canada, so even though my family's from 48, I'm not elevating 48 because I live there. This is like...
He spoke on that. He said that they have, so I understand.
Yeah, okay, so please don't take this like I'm elevating them because I think that had it not been for the people of 48, the issue of Palestine would have turned into just a border dispute. Right? I think it's the presence of the people who remained, the 150,000 who remained in the aftermath of 48, that kept the issue of Palestine alive. And the fact that you had these people who remained like a sore spot for the Israelis, so much so that they still to this day talk about we didn't finish the job in 1948. And so the role that they play is an important one, but also not so important. Important because they understand not only the language, but they understand the way of thinking. They understand how, what the Israeli culture is about. They do totally understand it. At the same time, there's been a little bit of a co-opting. Right? There's been a co-opting in that it's not that they have been like totally like that, but there is a bit of a co-opting in that for some of them, they see that their future is very much tied into with the Israelis. Right?
You're talking about the West Bank Palestinians?
No, I'm talking about inside 48.
Inside 48.
Inside 48. Inside 48. And also, there's been a problem with the way that the PLO has handled them. For the PLO really excluded them. So much so that it was like a totally foreign issue. For example, when in 2006, I think it was, or 2007, when the Israelis went on this big thing of the Jewishness of the state, right, when that became the big negotiation issue, when they kept saying, you must recognize Israel as a Jewish state. You heard about all this stuff. And Abu Mazen, and they were saying, so it's up for a negotiation issue. Like Palestinians inside were saying, what? What do you mean they're recognizing Israel as a Jewish state? The PLO never bothered to ask Palestinians inside what they meant about that, what that actually means. So there's been like a sidelining of Palestinians in 48. What role can they play? They can play a positive role. Again, because they understand the culture, they understand the language, they understand the way of thinking it. They understand that. Palestinians in the diaspora also play a role. They play a role in that there's so much work that can be done in each of the different countries to do everything from pushing for an arms embargo, pushing the societies, there's just so much work that can be done. And I think that when you have all of these communities come together under one umbrella, it can be very powerful. Our problem, I feel, as somebody who lives over there, but again, I was born and raised in Canada, is that I don't feel that it's ever been working together, ever. I feel like the center has always been just in the West Bank, and has never, and not even in Gaza, it's just been in the West Bank. And it's been in the West Bank at the detriment of everybody else.
Yeah, Noordine? Yeah, just wait for the microphone.
So as most of the polls shows, like the majority of the Israeli approve, endorse, advocate this genocide. So it's the most democratic war crime inside Israel. Is there any way to coexist with a genocidal society?
Well, it's a question on two levels. One, for Palestinians living inside, and then I think his question was mostly about the neighboring states. And, the answer that many of the Arab states would say is absolutely yes, because they want to join the Abraham Accords.
I don't think Israel gives 2 weeks about the Abraham Accords. I'll be honest. I don't think Israel cares. I don't think Israelis care at all. I think that like a few years ago, yes, they cared. But I don't think if you ask Israelis today if they want to travel to Saudi Arabia or to Oman, they don't care.
A lot of them are going to Dubai.
That's fine. They can, you know what? They can make the desert bloom there. All right? That's thank you.
Yeah, at the back, at the very back. Yeah, keep your hand up. Young man at the back. And then you're next. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to us. I was curious if you had any hope for the two-state solution coming out of this horrific war and with peace deal, hopefully from the end of the war. What do you see for the future of the two-state solution?
So this is the piece that I wrote about.
Yeah.
Okay, so I call the two-state solution the magic pill. And the reason I called it the magic pill was because for all of these years, that's all I've ever heard is two-state solution, two-state solution, two-state solution, two-state solution. And the question is, what is the two-state solution? Like, what is this? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is it? And if you ask people, look, I asked them before 2023. If you ask Israelis, do you believe in the two-state solution? They'll say, yeah, of course we believe in the two-state solution. Ask Palestinians, do you believe in the two-state solution? Yeah, we believe in the two-state solution. Ask them specifically what the two-state solution is, you'll get totally wildly different answers about what the two-state solution is. Wildly different answers as to what the two-state solution is. And so, is it possible? Sure, anything's possible. But it requires political will. And that political will on the part of Israel is not there and never has been. It never has been. And it requires political will on the part of the international community to get the settlements out and the settlers out. And it has never been there, and I don't think it ever will be there. So is there a future for the two-state solution? Yeah.
The woman who has her sunglasses on her head with her hand in the air, yeah, there it is, thank you.
To add context to the question first, I want to bring up the issue of South Africa and how in the 80s, a big part of what got Western powers to act on South Africa wasn't just the majority of world opinion, advocating like, hey, we don't want genocide. It wasn't the UN, it wasn't any of that. A large part of it was they were worried that if South Africa, if the genocide in South Africa didn't stop, the occupation by Rhodesia didn't stop, then there would be Nelson Mandela would go negotiate with communists and put pressure on them that way. So what I'm trying to ask is, what would that look like for Palestine? What other political situation can they leverage to be hey, put pressure on states to actually move forward to end the genocide? Because it doesn't seem like public opinion and the UN is largely toothless. All those things, they just aren't moving the ball forward. What can move the ball forward? There has to be something else here, and I'm just not seeing it because I'm not a law expert.
I actually do think that the ball is moving forward, oddly enough. And I'll explain why, but back, I guess it was August and September. Yeah, August and then September. There were a couple of sorry, it's just September. A couple of these flotillas, these boats that went to try to go to Gaza. And they included 500 activists, including some pretty high-profile people. And these were people who went at great risk to themselves. They risked their lives. It was very costly. They took time from their lives. They did exactly what states should have been doing and that the states didn't do. And they were abducted from international waters, brought into Israel against their will, beaten, put into prison, really terrible mistreatment, and not only mistreated, but their governments didn't come to their assistance. When I think of, for example, Sweden, I know two things about Sweden. IKEA and Greta. That's it. I don't know anything else. I don't know about you. Yes, you could Greta work and IKEA. I don't know anything else about Sweden, or nothing comes about. Nothing else comes about. I've been to Sweden, lovely country, lovely people, but those are two things that come to mind. And the Swedish government did nothing for it. Absolutely nothing. But I think the point is, I think that tide is going to break. Right? I think that tide is going to break, and the ways in which we're seeing that this movement is growing and growing and growing, and you see that it's starting to have impact. around, in different places around the world. Look, the global south has always been pro-Palestinian. It's these places that you're starting to see growing. And even in this country, where you're starting to see people who are conservative questioning, why is so much of our money going to Israel? Why are we fighting these wars for Israel? Why are we killing Muslims in these countries for Israel? Why is this happening? So it's starting. And we're getting to the point where we're reaching that, I don't like the book, but the tipping point, right? We're reaching that point. And we'll get there. We will get there.
Okay, let's take a few more questions, then we'll wrap it up. Sarah?
Thank you. If a two-state solution is very difficult to imagine, who is envisioning the one-state solution in the most articulate way at present?
There have been a lot of one-state initiatives that have gone on for a while now. And there's one called the One Democratic State Initiative, and there's one called the One Democratic State Campaign, and both have been around for a while. The interesting thing is that now, over the course of the past 2 years, both initiatives, which they're effectively the same, the numbers have grown. And the interesting thing is the number of Jewish Israelis have been the ones who are beginning to see and beginning to boost the numbers.
Here at the front.
Great, thank you so much for coming to this talk today. I just wanted to ask you, given the failure of both armed resistance and negotiations, what kind of political strategy do you think can actually move the struggle forward now?
I can't say that there have been failures. We could talk about that more off. But I think the one thing that is moving and is changing is, again, the BDS movement. I think that has been a huge success for a few reasons. For both of those that you've mentioned, it brings just a certain segment of society and engages just a small segment of society. BDS widens that segment. So it's not just a small group of people, particularly in negotiations, it's such a small group of people. But it widens it. It's like you, everybody in this room, people, your neighbors, your friends, other people, and it widens it a lot. And so I think that's where it can grow, but there's a but. That's where it requires a little bit of a stronger leadership. But it's not just that we're missing a Nelson Mandela. We're missing an ANC. We're missing an ANC.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a question right there, then we're going to go to Bill Lawrence, then I'll read one online, and then we're going to wrap it up.
This is just to build off a previous question. You mentioned like a growing conscience in the States and sort of breaking the tide. How do you think we're going to do this when the term genocide itself is contested, and how are we going to hold these genocide actors accountable?
Do you think it's so contested?
Well, it depends on what you mean by contested.
Well, I just want to be a man with the former Prime Minister of Israel last week, and that was like a big debate.
Well, of course he's going to contest it.
Of course, but I think in the States in general, especially like at Georgetown here, a lot of people, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think it's contested. And, the Israelis always contest. War criminals always contest their war crimes. I don't think the war criminals ever said, yes, I'm guilty. So I'm not so sure it's contested. I don't live here, but I live over there. I'm not so sure it's contested. But all to say, there is a consensus now of human rights groups that are calling it genocide. As I mentioned, 2 Israeli groups late to the game, but that are calling it genocide as well. Genocide scholars, the Association of Genocide Scholars. I'm not so sure it's so.
It's only contested from by those people who support the genocide.
Yes, of course.
Bill Lawrence.
I had a fun exchange with my former boss, Robert Malley, recently at
Nice to see
GW.
you. Yes.
And in Tomorrow's Yesterday, he basically said, no two-state solution possible. And then on the penultimate page, he says, but creative solutions. But there isn't much there.
You want to say something who Robert Malley is?
Robert Malley,
Talking
former, he wrote the book on Oslo and started the Camp David negotiations, and he was White House Middle East director and did the Iran negotiations and former head of crisis group, and now at Yale. But anyway, we've talked about two-state, we've talked about one state. What about in creative? Have you seen anything in your years of thinking about this sort of on the creative side of things?
So it's not one state or two
It's not one
states?
state or two-state, or some version of, he talks about federations and this and that. I mean, have you heard anything that could be even like an intermediary towards something, other than just the one state?
The problem with all of these creative options is that they are trying to ignore, they are ignoring the harm, and it's very serious harm, that the settlements pose. The settlements are created on Palestinian land. The settlers are there to terrorize Palestinians. And when you try to legitimize the presence of these settlements and these settlers in order to become creative, that's really problematic. And that's why, so there are other that's interesting, there are other one state initiatives, but the one state initiatives that are the ones that are the best are the ones that recognize that there is colonization and aim at decolonizing. There's others that say, oh, well, let's just accept, but the reality is from today, it's the magic day. And so this idea of creative solutions is always about Palestinians accepting the presence of these illegal settlements that are very harmful, and just pretending that this harm doesn't exist. And it's very harmful. Look, the fascinating thing is that, I'll be personal here. The village that the town that my father came from, if my father were still alive today, we can still go back to it. This isn't ages and ages and eons ago. This was not even 80 years ago. And so why is it that we can't think creatively to have people go back to the land that they came from? Especially now with Gaza, now that Israel has decimated Gaza. Rather than thinking of, they can go to Egypt, or they can go to Libya, or they can go to Somalia, or wherever. Sudan. How about they go back to their homes, which are just a few kilometers in the other direction, in what is today Israel? Isn't that that's creative, and that's the most logical.
So I have one question here, and then we'll take one more from the audience, and then that's it. The question here has to do with Trump and Netanyahu and this fragile peace deal. What do you think Trump will do going forward? Will he preserve and pressure Netanyahu to keep the fragile ceasefire going or not? Do you think he'll turn his back and walk away?
I think that there's been a lot of, okay, so let me start with the Israelis first. So Netanyahu, for a long time, there has been he's always tried to show that he's the boss. Right? Like he's been, and with his base and beyond, he always tries to show people that he's the person who's in charge. That he calls the shots, it's not America. And this has been going on for a very long time. Like we're the ones who call the shots, it's not the Americans. And so he's gonna do a lot of this, like I'm the one who calls the shots. And the question is whether Trump is gonna let him or not let him. And so far it's been a lot of Trump letting him. And I don't know. I'll say I don't know. I don't know if he's gonna.
One last question, then we'll have to end it. Yeah, right there, young man with the glasses.
Thank you for speaking. I wanted to ask about what you think is the best way to kind of approach shifting the sentiment in Israel, especially if we're looking at a one-state solution that is peaceful. How do we combat a sentiment that's been cultivated over the last 75 years and push back on that kind of sentiment?
Accountability. That's it.
What do you mean by accountability?
You know, Nat, for all of the years, from 1948 onward, nobody has been held to account, or very few, let's say, very few, so accurate. Very few have been held to account for the crimes that they've committed. And the very few that have been held to account is for very small little things that they have done. I'll give you an example. Shireen Awakde, my friend with a few other people in this room. She was an American citizen, Palestinian, but American citizen, journalist. She was killed by an Israeli sniper.
The Al Jazeera journalist.
Al Jazeera journalist. She was killed by an Israeli sniper in May of 2022. And nobody was held to account for that. Nobody was ever held to account for that. It was just that, not only was nobody held to account, they kind of you can't kill somebody twice, but they effectively killed her several times. First she was killed. She was a sniper in the back of the head. Then we had leader after leader after leader blame Palestinians for killing her. Then after a big fight, and it was proven that it was the Israelis that killed her. Then at her funeral, they tried to impose conditions so that she couldn't be buried properly. It's just all these crazy things. Nobody is ever held to account. Right? So that creates an environment in which we see today that Israeli soldiers are, I don't know if you've seen these videos where they are wearing women's lingerie, where they're doing a save the date and then blowing up a house in Gaza. There was one very famous guy, he became famous on TikTok. He's a carpenter. So he was going into houses in Gaza and he was examining the kitchens and looking at the wood before then smashing the kitchen. And on the news, they would ask him about what he observed the kitchens. Right? Nobody bothered to ask him, why are you smashing them? Right? Why are you doing this? And so this culture of impunity, and then soldiers who are raping people, soldiers who are torturing people, this culture of impunity, of dehumanizing Palestinians, we're invisible, completely invisible. The only way that we become visible is if there is accountability for these crimes that they're committing.
And the last thing is that Shireen Awakde was an American citizen, right? And so when Tony Blinken was asked about accountability, he completely swept it under the carpet. So the added point that you just made has an American component to it, where the United States not only need to defend the human rights of its own citizens, how can you expect anyone else to do so? I mean, so this is part of the reality that we're facing. We're out of time. I appreciate you being here, Diana. This is a difficult topic. It's a dark moment, but we appreciate you being here, trying to educate us on your perspective on what's going on. Please join me in thanking.